You know, when people think about Michael Jackson, they tend to think about the music, the performances, his short films, fashion sense, and unfortunately, sometimes the controversies. But one thing that people need to understand is that Michael probably was the king of side quests. Like, you think of any random thing a celebrity can do, and I promise you, Mike either did it or he had a hand in it. But one of Michael's most slept on yet very iconic side quests was when he starred in probably one of the best movie tie-in video games of all time. A game that actually helped Sega fight back during the console wars against Nintendo. A game that would also lead to one of the coolest short-term partnerships in all of gaming history. This is the story of Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, the video game. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Stoney the Great. For all my new viewers, welcome. Glad to have you. Don't forget, hit the like button and subscribe button and the notification bell. And for all my return viewers, welcome back, gang. Now, let's talk some history. And one thing about me that a lot of y'all may know and a lot of y'all don't know is I love video games, and I especially love retro video games. And the one thing that I love about retro games, you know, other than the nostalgia factor, is the fact that these games have some of the coolest backstories that you probably never heard of. Gaming development was way different back then, so it's pretty dope to learn how they came up with the stuff they came up with such limited technology. Now, by the late 1980s, Michael Jackson had pretty much became a demigod. This man was no longer just a musician. He was a global icon. He was the most famous person on planet Earth. In fact, I think this is when he officially became the most famous person in history since Jesus Christ himself, because there has yet to be anybody that became more famous than Mike. Sold out tours, people passing out in the crowd. Yeah, that shit was crazy. But 1988 was about to get real interesting for my boy Mike, because in 1988, he released this, Moonwalker. Weird little film. It's like a compilation of concert footage and videos. Then it runs through like a montage of his life, kind of like a greatest hits compilation. We got a concert performance of Man in the Mirror, a new version of the Bad video featuring little kids called Batter. We got the Speed Demon short film, the Leave Me Alone short film. Then the whole tone shifts and is no longer a music video compilation, and it turns into this weird little fantasy sci-fi movie. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the movie because honestly, this could be its own video. Literally could be a completely different video that will probably be longer than this one. So if you want me to do a story of Moonwalker, the movie, after this one, let me know. You know, I got you. But see, at the same time as Michael's late 80s success, there was another industry that was also starting to see a lot of major growth. And that industry was the gaming industry. Now, this was way before Sony and Microsoft entered the market. At this point, the big three were Atari, Nintendo, and Sega. And see, in the late 80s, it wasn't just about the arcades anymore. For majority of the decade, gaming companies pretty much had to compete in the arcades, making the games, building the cabinets, and basically just setting them out in the wild and seeing which one gets bit the most. But in the late 80s, this is when the home gaming market started to open up, and it changed the game completely. And in that home market, that's when we saw Nintendo, Sega, and Atari going head to head. Now, if you know anything about gaming history, especially this era in particular, then you know that Nintendo was putting belt to ass on any competitor in the market. Atari was cool, I guess, but it was extremely played out by 1988. Sega was dope too, but it was always seen as second to Nintendo. I mean, they even pretty much followed the Nintendo formula by having, you know, an iconic platformer character. Nintendo had Mario, Sega had Sonic, Atari had joysticks, so we can see why they lost. But no matter how decent the Genesis was doing, it wasn't nothing in comparison to this behemoth of a gray block right here called the Nintendo Entertainment System. Like I said, bro, I know ball when it comes to this shit. Y'all gotta tap in for real. The NES completely revolutionized the home gaming market. Not to mention, it had these little add-ons like this right here, a little joystick that basically brought the arcade home. When it comes to legendary gaming consoles, bro, this one definitely is in like the top 5 of all time. Now, how is Sega gonna beat that? They wasn't, unless they had a plan. However, that plan wouldn't have worked had it not been for Nintendo low-key fumbling in a bag, because Michael Jackson actually went to Nintendo first with an idea for a video game, but Nintendo turned it down. Why they turned it down, I really don't know. I guess because they had too much going on. Plus, they didn't really need the help, even though Michael Jackson definitely would have probably sent them to the stratosphere. They were doing just fine, so I guess they didn't really see it as a loss. Desperate to have some kind of fight in the competition, Sega said, hey, we'll rock with you, no pun intended. So that was when Sega and Michael first teamed up to produce the video game for his movie Moonwalker. Now, one of the weirdest things about this game, other than the combat mechanics, but we'll get to that a little later, was the fact that there wasn't just one version. There were several different versions of the game released on various platforms. There was an arcade version, a Mega Drive version, then there's the most famous and well-known version, the Sega Genesis version. It was also released on various home computer systems. There was a Commodore 64 version, an Amiga version, a ZX Spectrum version, and an Atari ST version. And naturally, of course, all these different platforms didn't have the same power across the board, so some versions versions of Moonwalker looked better, some looked worse, some probably shouldn't have been released at all. But it wasn't just the look of the game that changed across these platforms. There were actually two completely different ways the game played, and depending on what platform you played it on, that determined the version of the game you got. For example, the arcade version is like a fast-paced, side-scroller beat-em-up game, pretty much like Streets of Rage. Imagine that game, but with Michael Jackson in the Smooth Criminal outfit. And honestly, that version worked perfectly for arcades because it wasn't meant to be played over a long period of time. It was only meant to be played in that moment. So it basically removed all of the core story of the game and just left the action parts. And I'm not gonna lie, bro, is this not one of the coolest arcade machines you've ever seen? Like, I have an arcade cabinet in my background, but it's not a freaking Michael Jackson Moonwalker arcade cabinet. One day I'm gonna find one and I'm gonna get it. It's probably gonna cost me an arm and a fucking leg. The Sega Genesis version was very different. It still had all the action, but it was a lot slower. It had a more heavier emphasis on puzzles, had a lot more exploration, and played out more like a platformer than a beat 'em up game. Basically, in the arcade version, you just had to whoop as much ass as you could while you had the cabinet to yourself before it was time to give up the sticks. The Sega Genesis version was meant to give you time to sit with the game and explore. There's a few more little quirky differences between the two. Like in the Sega Genesis version, Bubbles plays a helpful NPC guide kind of character, and he basically helps you to the end where you fight the final boss. And in the arcade version, at the end of the game, you turn into that same like transformer ass robot that Michael turned into at the end of the Moonwalker movie. Two completely different experiences, but at the core, the game was basically the same. Now, one of the unique things about this game was the way the combat played. Because remember, the main character is Michael Jackson. Michael is not doing, typical fighting moves because he's Michael Jackson. So he ain't just whooping ass regularly, he's whooping ass while dancing. Like in the Sega Genesis version specifically, if you hold the attack button, you'll actually do the moonwalk and it inflicts damage. So yeah, that's pretty fucking cool. But doing the moonwalk in the game doesn't inflict damage like itself. It actually helps you charge up your magic to make your attacks more powerful. So yeah, I just want you to imagine a video game where you do the moonwalk to basically power up on some Dragon Ball Z type shit. And in case you haven't noticed by the footage of the game that you've seen on screen here, the whole aesthetic of the game is basically the Smooth Criminal video. And that kind of makes sense because if you look at the Smooth Criminal video, the only thing Mike was doing was just whooping ass and causing havoc the entire video. So yeah, making a video game off of that kind of makes sense. The game also included digitized versions of Michael Jackson's real songs. Some of the songs that were included in the game were a digitized version of Smooth Criminal, Beat It, Billie Jean, and Bad. And these songs basically served as the soundtrack of the game. I don't know, something about hearing a pixelated version of Billie Jean through arcade cabinet speakers in 1990 probably would have made me a very happy person. And with Michael and Sega teaming up to do these digital versions of his songs, that actually inspired them to work on another project together. And that project had to do a little something with their little blue mascot. But again, I don't want to talk too much about that because that also could be a completely different video. So remember, if you want that history of the Moonwalk movie video, I got you. And if you want the history of Michael Jackson and Sega video, I got you. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, technically this game did not come out in 1988. That's just kind of when the concept was started and that's when the partnership began. 1988 is when the movie came out and Sega and Michael started working shortly after that. The game was officially completed in 1990, 2 years after the movie's release. And just like the movie, the final boss of the game was Mr. Big, who in the movie was played by Joe Pesci. Now, was this game any good? Honestly, yeah, it's pretty damn fun. I played the Sega Genesis version a bunch of times and I got this little handheld emulator offline and it had Michael Jackson's Moonwalker on there, but it was the arcade version. And that was the first time that I got to play the arcade version. So since I played both versions, I can personally say, yeah, the Michael Jackson Moonwalker game is pretty damn fun. But did it sell good? Kind of, sort of. One of the oddest things about this game with Sega is that they never really officially released the sales numbers. So there's no ballpark figure or even a general assumption of how much the game sold. All we know is that the arcade version was a hit. So seeing that the arcade version was a hit and the home video game market was so big at the time, we can just assume that it sold pretty decent copies. I mean, the arcade version was so successful that in September of 1990, it was actually voted as the top grossing new arcade game, which is insanely impressive because in 1990, arcades were competitive, very competitive. So this little weird ass game being the top grossing new one that came out that year, pretty impressive. And the Genesis version was very important for Sega because it had Michael Jackson's name attached to it. And remember, this is before any of the allegations came, so there was really no stain on his name. So at this time, anything with Michael Jackson's name on it was gonna sell crazy. And if you really want to look at it, this was one of the first like big console exclusives because Sega was promoting the hell out of this game simply because if you bought the console, you could get this game. And that was their whole selling point. So in 1990, Sega had 2 mascots. And I'm very proud to have this thing because it is a collector's item. So this is one of those things I'm never going to get rid of. Having a VHS and the game, pretty cool. Although looking back on it, Moonwalker is, kind of a weird little game. Looking at the game itself, even removing Michael Jackson's name from it, it's actually a pretty fun game. And I would have to say that it aged pretty well. You can find an emulator version of this game right now and it feels great to play. The controls are smooth. The attacks are extremely fun, the music is great, and it just goes to show you how simple things were back then. Everything didn't have to be photorealistic. This is back when nobody cared about frame rate. There wasn't a cinematic story or intricate combat system. It was basically just pixels and digitized Michael Jackson music and being able to beat up bad guys while dancing like Michael Jackson. I mean, shit, to me that sounds like a damn good time. Was it perfect? No, but let's be honest, I don't think there was any video game from back then that was perfect. And it's crazy to think that man Michael Jackson really had his hand in everything. And it just goes to show you he was truly ahead of his time. And the more I think about it, I don't know if Mike was really ahead of his time or if he was right on time and we just catching up too late. But either way it goes, the Moonwalker video game will always be remembered as one of Michael Jackson's most slept on but most interesting side quests of all time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes today's deep dive of the life and work of our boy Michael Jackson. This man, I got about 2 spin-off videos that I can do from this one. A deep dive into the Moonwalker movie and a deep dive into the Sony Michael Jackson partnership. Once again, if you want those videos, just hit me up in the comments and let me know and I will be more than happy to produce that for you. But until next time, y'all know the drill. Like, comment, hit the subscribe button, notification bell, and stay tuned for the next one. Once again, it's your boy Stoney the Great. Y'all be easy.